Picture this. The door to your sleeping quarters bursts inward with a crack like thunder. Before your hand can even find the sword resting against the wall, rough arms tear you from the bed and slam you onto the freezing floor. You are a French soldier stationed in Bruges. The room fills with men who smell of iron, sweat, and raw wool. These aren't knights. They're butchers and weavers, gripping axes still slick from whatever they were doing in the street moments ago. One of them, a giant with scarred hands, grabs you by the hair, jerks your head back, and presses a heavy blade against your throat. He doesn't ask for money. He doesn't ask your name. He shouts a single phrase straight into your face. Schild und vriend, shield and friend. Your life now depends on your accent. You try to repeat the words, but your French tongue can't shape the harsh, guttural sounds. You stumble. The blade shifts. The last thing you hear is the wet gurgle of your own blood joining the stream, already running down the cobblestones outside. This wasn't a battlefield death. It was intimate, personal, and it was the spark that ignited the Battle of the Golden Spurs, a conflict that would see the most feared knights in Europe slaughtered like livestock in the mud. Before we dive deeper into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy uncovering the hidden truths of history, consider hitting like and subscribing. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from. It still amazes me that we're exploring these ancient moments together, scattered across the modern world, but united by curiosity about the past. To understand why shopkeepers were murdering soldiers at dawn on May 18th, 1302, we need to strip away the romantic polish of the Middle Ages. Forget tournaments and courtly love. 14th century Flanders was a brutal system of exploitation dressed up as order. King Philip IV of France, called Philip the Fair, saw the wealthy cities of Flanders not as communities, but as vaults waiting to be cracked open. He needed gold to finance his endless wars, and Bruges and Ghent were drowning in it thanks to the textile trade. Philip didn't negotiate, he occupied. To enforce his will, he sent Jacques de Châtillon, a governor with all the finesse of a battering ram. French troops were quartered inside private homes. Imagine the humiliation. Foreign soldiers eating your food, sleeping under your roof, harassing your family, with the full backing of the French crown. The message was unmistakable. You are not citizens. You are property. But Philip and Châtillon made a catastrophic mistake. They confused a lack of noble titles with a lack of courage. Because these men dyed wool and tanned hides, because their hands were calloused from work instead of sword hilts, the French assumed they wouldn't fight. They were wrong. On that morning remembered as the Matins of Bruges, the city didn't erupt into a riot. It carried out a purge. Peter de Koninck, a weaver with a gift for rebellion, had organized the guilds into execution squads. They moved through the city before dawn with terrifying coordination. Their target wasn't symbols. It was every Frenchman they could find. Uniforms were useless in the darkness, so the Flemish used language as a weapon. Schild und vriend became a linguistic trap. The Flemish dialect required a specific throat movement that native French speakers couldn't reproduce. One mispronunciation meant death. By sunrise, the canals were clogged with bodies. Roughly 2,000 French soldiers and loyalists were dragged from beds, churches, and hiding places and butchered in the open streets. Jacques de Châtillon barely escaped, fleeing in disguise while his garrison was erased from existence. This wasn't a battle, it was a message, written in blood and sent straight to Paris. When the news reached the French court, the shock was seismic. To the nobility, this wasn't rebellion. It was an inversion of the natural order, as obscene as sheep devouring wolves. The code of chivalry held that war was the domain of nobles, governed by rules and honor. The Flemish had smashed the board and set it on fire. Philip the Fair didn't respond with diplomacy. He summoned Robert of Artois. Robert was everything a French knight was supposed to be: brave, aggressive, and absolutely convinced of his own superiority. To him, the Flemish weren't soldiers. They were vermin that needed to be crushed. He assembled a punitive army meant to terrify. 2,500 noble knights and squires, the elite of European warfare, supported by thousands of infantry and crossbowmen. These knights rode massive destriers, war horses bred for impact, and wore the finest armor money could buy. The goal wasn't just to retake Bruges. It was to deliver a punishment so absolute that no commoner would ever dare challenge a knight again. As Robert marched north, he burned villages, trampled crops, and drove refugees ahead of his army like cattle. The smoke was intentional. He wanted the Flemish to see their fate coming. The people of Flanders faced a brutal choice. They had enraged a superpower. They had no cavalry, no king, and no castles. Retreat meant execution. Surrender meant slavery. So the army of shopkeepers did the unthinkable. They took up pikes, clubs, and Goedendags and marched to Courtrai. They studied the land, the river Lys, the marshy streams, the innocent-looking green fields, and understood something the French did not. If they couldn't defeat the knights in a fair fight, they would force them into an unfair one. Robert of Artois was coming to trample them. The weavers and butchers of Flanders were preparing a kill box, and the stage was set for a clash that would shatter the spine of the French nobility forever. 200 miles south of the bloodshed in Bruges, the mood in the royal court of Paris was not fear. It was cold, surgical fury. King Philip IV sat at the center of his power, a man described by contemporaries as more statue than flesh. Handsome, silent, unblinking. They called him the Fair, but behind closed doors, people whispered another word: ruthless. To a king who believed his authority came directly from God, the massacre of his garrison wasn't just rebellion, it was heresy. Philip didn't shout or slam his fist on the table. He calculated. In the medieval worldview, society functioned because everyone stayed in their place. Nobles fought and ruled. Clergy prayed. Commoners worked and obeyed. When the weavers of Bruges slaughtered knights, they threatened the foundation of the entire system. If a fuller could kill a count, then no crown in Europe was truly safe. So Philip unleashed the full weight of the French state. Messengers rode out across the kingdom carrying the royal seal. From Burgundy to Normandy, the order was simple: assemble. What gathered beneath the golden fleur-de-lis was not a mob, but a precision instrument of medieval violence. At its core rode the French knights, heavy cavalry, the undisputed kings of the battlefield for centuries. A knight in 1302 was not just a soldier. He was a weapons platform. Encased in steel, mounted on a massive destrier bred for aggression and weight, a knight was a human tank. The horse alone cost more than a peasant earned in a lifetime. When 2,000 of these riders charged together, the impact could shatter infantry formations through sheer physics. For generations, no force had reliably stopped them. Commanding this army was Robert of Artois. If Philip was the brain of France, Robert was its sword. A prince of the blood and a veteran of countless campaigns, he embodied chivalry and all its flaws. Brave, charismatic, and catastrophically arrogant. To him, this wasn't a war. It was a disciplinary beating. He wasn't marching to fight equals. He was marching to punish rebellious animals. That attitude infected the army. As the French host moved north, the march felt more like a parade. Knights packed silks and velvet alongside their weapons. They brought falcons, hunting dogs, fine wine. Many expected the Flemish to scatter the moment the royal banner appeared. The idea that a militia of shopkeepers could resist them wasn't just unlikely. It was absurd. Still, Robert made the march itself a weapon. Villages were burned, fields were destroyed. Anyone found on the road was killed. The smoke was meant to break Flemish morale, to fracture their alliance. Robert expected Ghent to betray Bruges. He expected delegations crawling on their knees, keys in hand. Instead, the terror hardened them. The smoke on the horizon didn't inspire surrender. It confirmed what the Flemish already knew. There was nothing left to lose. The cities didn't fracture. They fused. Men poured toward Courtrai, not away from it. When Robert of Artois reached the outskirts of the town, he surveyed the field with confidence. He commanded roughly 2,500 noble cavalry and more than 5,000 infantry, including elite Genoese crossbowmen. Across the field, he saw the Flemish drawn up on foot. No banners of noble houses, no shining armor. To him, it looked like poverty made visible. What Robert failed to see was the land. The terrain around Courtrai was a nightmare for cavalry. The river lies and a web of drainage streams cut through the fields. The soil was soft, waterlogged, unstable. Horses needed firm ground to deliver a charge. This ground would betray them. Some of Robert's advisors urged caution. They suggested using crossbowmen to wear the Flemish down. Others proposed waiting them out. Why risk noble blood against commoners? Robert sneered at the advice. To wait was cowardice. To let mercenaries win the battle was dishonor. He wanted a charge. He wanted impact. He reportedly bragged that he would ride the Flemish down so fast the mud wouldn't have time to dry on their boots. The French camp settled in. Armor was polished until it gleamed. Lances were sharpened. Bets were placed on how many weavers each knight would kill. They slept easily, wrapped in confidence. Across the field, no one slept. The French looked out and saw a dark mass of men in dirty tunics pressed against the river. A rabble, a peasant mob. It was one of the most dangerous misjudgments in military history. What stood there was the Flemish militia, something entirely new. This was the weaponization of the middle class. To understand why these men didn't break, you need to understand the medieval guild. In Flanders, a guild wasn't just a trade association. It was a government, a welfare system, and a family. If you were a weaver, the guild set your wages, protected your widow, and buried you when you died. Now it formed your unit. The man on your right wasn't a stranger from another province. He was the man who'd worked beside you at the loom for 10 years. The man on your left was your neighbor. You knew his children. Running wasn't just cowardice, it was betrayal. This created a level of cohesion the French knights could not match. The knights fought for glory. The Flemish fought for each other. Their equipment reflected the same mindset. No custom-fitted plate. Instead, heavy kettle helmets, thick gambesons, chainmail, pikes, axes, and crossbows. Industrial, mass-produced gear. Not elegant, extremely effective. Their leaders weren't counts or dukes. They were men like Peter de Koninck, a one-eyed weaver with a voice that could set cities on fire, and John Bridle, leader of the Butchers' Guild, a man who understood anatomy in the most practical way possible. These leaders didn't command from horseback. They stood in the front rank. The mood in the Flemish camp was grim and focused. They knew the truth. Knights could be ransomed. Commoners could not. If they lost, there would be no mercy. So they placed the river lies behind them. It was a deliberate act. No retreat, no escape. Win here or die here. The Flemish militia organized with chilling discipline. Weavers formed the heavy infantry. Crossbowmen covered the flanks. Butchers acted as shock troops. Orders moved quietly through the ranks. The French saw chaos. They were about to discover how wrong they were. Discipline alone, however, doesn't stop a cavalry charge. Brotherhood won't halt 1,000 pounds of horseflesh moving at full speed. To kill a knight, you need a tool designed to negate armor, mass, and momentum. The Flemish had one, and it was about to rewrite military history. They called it the Goedendag. At first glance, it looks almost laughably simple. A thick wooden staff, about 5 feet long, swollen at the top like a crude club, with a sharp steel spike driven straight out of the end. No elegance, no reach like a spear, no prestige like a sword. It looks like something pulled from a barn. On July 11th, 1302, it became the most terrifying object on the battlefield. The name itself is a dark joke. Goedendag translates to good day. Oral tradition suggests the militia would greet their oppressors with a cheerful good day, right before crushing their skulls. Whether that's true or not, the weapon's design was brutally intelligent. By this period, knights wore mail reinforced with early plate armor. Swords were nearly useless against it. Arrows needed lucky hits at weak points. The Goedendag ignored finesse entirely and leaned into physics. First came the spike. When a cavalry charge thundered in, the militiamen planted the base into the mud and aimed the steel point at the horse's chest. The horse's own momentum did the rest, impaled, collapsing, throwing the rider into the dirt. Then came the club. The Goedendag was top-heavy, made of dense oak reinforced with iron. Swung with 2 hands, it delivered massive concussive force. You didn't need to pierce armor. You just needed to turn it into a shock transmitter. A direct hit to a helmet sent trauma straight through the steel. Brain hemorrhages, broken necks, instant death. The Flemish didn't use the weapon randomly. They built doctrine around it. Pikemen formed the first rank, their long shafts creating a wall that stopped the horses. Goedendag men stood just behind them. The rhythm was precise. Pike halts the charge. Club finishes the rider. This required nerves of steel. Standing your ground against a charging destrier goes against every survival instinct. But the guildsmen trusted each other. Hold the line, and the man behind you would do his job. The French had never encountered anything like this. They saw crude sticks and assumed primitive mines. They didn't realize they were looking at an armor-piercing system. As the sun rose higher over Courtrai, the militia tightened their grips. They were ready. All they needed now was for the French to make a mistake. They did. At midday, Robert of Artois ordered his Genoese crossbowmen forward. This was, briefly, the correct decision. Bolts hissed through the air, punching into Flemish formations. Men fell, lines wavered. Had Robert waited, the crossbowmen might have won the battle. But patience was poison to chivalry. The French knights grew restless. To let paid mercenaries win the day was dishonorable. They wanted glory. They wanted impact. They wanted blood up close. Under mounting pressure, Robert recalled the crossbowmen and ordered the charge. The knights didn't even wait for their own infantry to clear the field. With cries of Montjoie Saint-Denis, they surged forward, trampling their allies beneath iron-shod hooves. The charge was already disordered before it crossed the field. And then the ground betrayed them. Hidden by mist and tall grass, the widened ditches of the groaning stream swallowed the front ranks. Horses snapped legs. Knights were launched from saddles. Those behind crashed into the fallen, creating a screaming metallic pileup. Momentum, the knights' greatest weapon, became their prison. Those who made it across found themselves face to face with a solid wall of pikes. Horses reared, slipped, refused to advance. The charge died in place. The Flemish horns sounded. The militia advanced. Goedendag men poured through the gaps. The sound of battle changed, from thunder to wet, crunching impacts. Knights couldn't swing their swords. They were trapped, waist-deep in mud, watching heavy clubs rise and fall. There were no ransoms. Before the battle, the Flemish commanders had given a single order: take no prisoners. They knew mercy meant future annihilation. Knights screamed their names, their titles, their wealth. It didn't matter. Among the chaos fought Robert of Artois himself. His horse was dead. He was surrounded. Accounts differ, but all agree on the end. He tried to surrender, tried to invoke his rank. No one cared. He died in the same mud as everyone else. By sunset, the flower of French nobility was annihilated. Hundreds of knights lay dead, their armor stripped, their horses bloating in the streams. Silence returned to Courtrai, broken only by the groans of the dying. The weavers had won, and then they collected their receipts. Knights were walking treasuries, and the field was rich beyond imagining. Armor, weapons, coin, but above all, spurs, the symbol of knighthood, the right to ride above common men. The Flemish stripped them by the basketful. Tradition says 500 pairs of golden spurs were collected. 1,000 pieces of gold, torn from the heels of the French elite. They were hung from the rafters of the Church of Our Lady in Courtrai, clinking softly in the candlelight, a macabre monument. For France, the loss was catastrophic. Entire noble lineages vanished in an afternoon. The king's council was gutted. Castles sat empty, waiting for child heirs. The age of the invincible knight was over. The spurs were eventually taken back. The war continued. But something fundamental had broken. Courtrai proved that discipline, terrain, and unity could destroy the most expensive weapon system of the age. It was the dawn of the infantry revolution. The Scots would echo it. The English would refine it. The Swiss would perfect it. But it started here, in the mud, with weavers holding the line. And the lesson still echoes. Armor means nothing without humility. Power fails when it underestimates resolve. And sometimes, all it takes to stop the charge is the courage to stand, and a sharp stick in the right place.